Good morning, everyone. My name is Haroon Moghul, and the man who is, well, kind of across from me is Joey Taylor. We started this podcast many months ago, Avenue M, with the idea that as two men who are dedicated to exploring life and meaning, it would be really important for us and helpful for us and nice for us to have conversations with cool people. But the actual initial impetus was always really just for Joey and I to get to hang out and have substantive conversations and share them with everyone out there because we found time and time again that the conversations we were having resonated with the experiences of plenty of other folks out there. That's why we're doing something different for this episode and actually truer to the initial objective and aspiration and ambition of Avenue M, which is just talking to each other. Joey's going to kick us off with a question. I actually don't know what he's going to ask me, so I have as little idea what's going to happen next as anyone else out there. Joey, it's good to see you. Ramadan
It's good as
Mubarak. Happy Lent.
yeah, same to you. Happy Lent, Ramadan Mubarak. I think one of the things that I'm excited about this morning is just being able to dive a little bit deeper into our own stories, our own motivations, and since we've started the podcast, you got this big new job at Xavier University, which is a Jesuit institution, and I know that you've spent the last 2 days being invited to speak into this Ignatian Jesuit context. And one of the key questions that they ask is, how is God moving in your life? Or where do you see the presence of God in your life? And you've been talking to students for the past 2 days about this. And so I wonder, as you've been reflecting on these two kind of sessions that you've done, what's like the um the the potted answer to how God is showing up in your life right now?
So yeah, I'm my official title behind the scenes is campus minister just for hierarchical and HR purposes, which actually sounds a little bit more fun than Muslim chaplain. I don't know why. It's just there's the novelty factor. But yeah, I'm the Muslim chaplain at Xavier University. I've been there for just a few months now, so it's still very much new to me. It is a Jesuit university. If folks are familiar with places like Georgetown, for example, certainly in Cincinnati, there are plenty of Jesuit institutions, but it's one that takes the Catholic tradition very seriously, but a very particular intellectual approach to Catholicism. I'm saying that as if I have any idea what that really means. I'm I'm a novice here, and I mean that in the casual sense of the term. I'm someone who's lived alongside Catholics pretty much my whole life. Actually, when I was in high school, I seriously thought about converting to Catholicism. I've always found a certain amount of appeal or intrigue in Catholicism. Actually, right over my shoulder, you can see two deluxe hardcover editions of two of Tolkien's most famous works, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. That's always been there. And yet, when I got this prompt, as you helpfully pointed out, I had no idea how to answer the question because the framing, how does God move in your life, is not a framing that Muslims ordinarily use. And we talk a lot about similarities between faith traditions. There's also differences. And what I think was hardest about the prompt was the fact that it laid bare a kind of hypocrisy or at least insufficiency. I often teach Muslim students and have myself developed my engagement with my understanding of Islam by trying to look at things by turning them on their side or flipping them over or taking a counterintuitive approach to solve a problem. I can unpack that later. And here I was being asked to do the same thing, and I was completely at a loss. So I'll be honest, the
Mm.
first time I taught this, which was 2 days ago, I'm pretty sure no one had any idea what I was talking about. I'm just being honest. The second time I taught it, which was yesterday, and I'm sorry, yeah, that was yesterday, and I'm going to teach it again today, so that's three in a row. But yesterday, because I understood the prompt better, I ended up provoking the people in the room to start wrestling with their own faith tradition in ways that actually made
Yeah.
me a little uncomfortable because they went to some pretty heavy and painful places pretty quickly. So
Mhm.
there's definitely value in the prompt, even though I've actually couldn't sleep last night because I kept coming back to this question of instead of looking at it like, where am I falling short? Where am I letting myself down? I started to ask the question in the other way, which is, why do I think certain things are happening to me? What is God trying to push me towards or pull me away from?
Mm.
So that doesn't
Mm.
answer your question, but it's a great way for me to kick it back to you and
What?
say, Joey, how does God move in your life?
So, well, say that again though. What does God push me towards or pull me away from? That's how.
Yeah,
That's how
so
you. Yeah.
I'm really wrestling with this, so thank you for opening this into a really hard place, but a really important place. I don't mean that in there's no resentment there at all. So I've been taught, and I think a lot of Muslims are taught to think about religion as these are my obligations to God.
Sure.
These are the rituals I need to practice. These are the virtues I need to cultivate. These are the behaviors I need to embody. And this is the community I should be a part of, or I should help to build. And there is a lot of merit in that because it puts the agency on you, and it gives you something tangible, you meaning me, uh, something tangible to do. And then this prompt, which the way I heard it and the way I internalized it and the way I stayed up all night thinking about it was, maybe what if I look at the times I failed or I came up short or I banged my head into a wall existentially, morally, what have you? What if that wasn't just where I didn't get it right, but what if it was me not being able to sense that perhaps God wanted something else for me? And there is a Muslim tradition of doing this, right? That we say, I applied for a job, maybe I really wanted the job and I didn't get the job. And folks will say it's not what Allah wanted for you. That Allah
Mm.
has something better for you.
Mm.
But there's a difference between simply saying something, I don't mean simply in a dismissive sense, but there's a difference between simply saying something in the moment and reconciling oneself to that, as opposed to looking at the arc of your entire life and saying that there is a clear trajectory here, that the divine, the creator, is pushing us in some direction and pulling us in another. And if even against our will, kicking and screaming, I really want this
Mm.
career and I keep trying and trying and trying and I'm failing. Maybe that's God saying you're not meant to be there. And it's an unfamiliar way to look at faith, but I would say it's a really, it's definitely struck a chord when you're struggling with it for days and days and days.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I think there's a way in which I have seen my own religious path as um, primarily an invitation to fall short. Like, again, I'm falling short. Again, I haven't lived up to it. Um, and that's a hard space for me to occupy. I think it has to do with how I was maybe brought up or whatever it is. And as I'm starting my Lenten journey right now, the thing that I felt kind of invited to focus on was the idea of return, of I don't know, in the Christian tradition you might talk about repentance, but the idea that every misstep is an opportunity to return to the divine, to God, to the mercy and forgiveness of God. And if my focus in these next 39 days is the act of returning, um, and that's the point of the spiritual life, to keep returning, to not buy into the lie that it's all or nothing. You're either perfect or it's not worth doing at all. Um, I don't know. At this point, I mean, I'm a day in, but it's feeling life giving to me right now, and I think it connects in some ways to what you're saying about focusing on shortcomings or whatever, as opposed to the grand trajectory of your life. I also really love the idea of the trajectory of your life. I mean, that's a very Ignatian thing, to see God in all things, including in the path that God has sort of laid for your life. Um, you work with a bunch of young people. I'm sure they're always going through discernment processes. What are some of the ways that you think about for your own life, how to chart the trajectory of your life?
That's another great question. So I'm 45, right in what might be the middle-ish of life. God only knows how long we have, but it feels like that. And I still have enough energy and ambition that I keep pushing myself, but I'm more than enough aware of the limitations of my body, how many years even optimistically might be left. And so it is probably the kind of time in a man's life, in a person's life, where we start to ask, what is this for? What have I done? What am I
Sure.
missing?
Yeah.
And I took that frame, the arc of a life, and I would actually invite people who are listening to do the same thing, that ask yourself where your life has led you to till now,
Yeah.
how much agency you've had or been able to have in that process, and where you'd like it to go. And for me, like you said, I do a lot of work with young people. I've been teaching middle and high schoolers for years in our local Cincinnati Muslim community. I've had dozens of students. Some of them are now in college. I obviously work with college students, not just at Xavier, but for decades now. And I actually think that mentoring and teaching are some of the most important things and meaningful things a person can do, not just for what we pass on, but what we have to internalize. So just a few days ago, a young man reached out to me, I guess 18 years old, amazingly smart guy. He's taking a gap year. He's at a great university. He's currently in Hawaii. This is the best story I've ever heard. He's in Hawaii and he spends his days surfing, studying Hawaiian cultures, volunteering at a social justice initiative. He's doing really cool stuff, right? He's obviously got his act together and he's got this drive, and I'm sure he'll be fine. And he reached out to me and he said, I have some questions about where I'm going next. And then the last thing he asked me was, what would you say to, what would you at 18 have wanted to do with your life? And so
Hmm.
I immediately asked him, I said, me at 18 when I was 18, or me now imagining I went back to 18, right?
Sure.
And those are two very different questions. And I actually said that the thing I've lacked over my life for a long time was a mentor.
Hmm.
I really, really didn't have mentors. And actually I said this yesterday at Xavier, and it caused some eyebrows to go up, but sometimes I like to say provocative things only to force people to pay attention. I said, being at Xavier often makes me sad. And that's probably not what the employees of the institution, including my superiors, wanted to hear. But I gave it a good 10 minutes before I came back to it just to create some anxiety, like, where is this going? And I said, the reason it makes me sad is because y'all have a space where you can do deep, sustained dives into your tradition, and
Yeah.
most Muslims do not.
Hmm.
My students get probably 15 hours over a semester with me in our high school courses. Many of them go to private schools, some of them go to public schools, some of these schools are Christian schools. They do deep dives into other traditions. They do not do deep dives into their own tradition.
Yeah.
So they don't even get a space where they get to ask those questions, like, what is the trajectory of your life? And that's actually something I've really been thinking on, is that a lot of the decisions I made that led me to where I am now, I think genuinely emerged from, and I'm not being self-important here, I think they emerged from a desire to do good. But
Uh-huh.
sometimes they backfired spectacularly.
Of course.
And I never had anyone in high school and college talk to me about career, talk to me about marriage, talk to me about how to build a professional network. These are all things I had to learn the hard way. And unfortunately for me, what got linked in my mind, and maybe it would have been healthier if I could have unlinked it or at least created some distance, is I was figuring out my faith as I was figuring out my professional life. And so the two
Hmm.
often moved in tandem. Now, in
Sure.
fairness, it's also because it's really hard to be a Muslim in the United States and not be sucked into politics, because you're constantly being talked down to. We are political footballs. So you can't escape it even if you want to, nor should you escape it. But I think when it comes to trajectory, I think where I am now is very much a product of someone who's trying to say, okay, where did I go right? Where did I go wrong? How can I build on the good? And how can I share where I went wrong? Not in a simple didactic sense, but in the sense of, hey, I've got high school students, college students, what could they benefit from? That frankly everyone would benefit from, but maybe people don't directly translate that into those conversations that those students and those people can be a part of. And actually that's one of the reasons why I want to do the podcast, is I found in
Hmm.
talking to you, it's easier to talk to you than many people in my community. Obviously some of that is personal reasons, but some of that is also that I think that we have wrestled with the same questions. We've been open to the same diversity of sources, I guess, or we've been eager to consume ideas and perspectives from all over the map. And if you look at the people we've had on the podcast, for example, we've had all kinds of people on the podcast, right?
Yeah.
And it's not easy to find that kind of space. And so, again, I haven't answered your question, but I think one of the great things about this podcast is I don't have to answer your question. And then I get to ask you a question. But first, I'll ask if you want to ask me another question.
Well, what I want to do is reflect just for a second on what you said.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think, I don't know, like that phase of your 18, 17, 18, 19, trying to figure out what the heck to do with your life, where to go to school, what girl's the right girl, or person's the right person. I mean, like that whole phase of your life feels so incredibly fraught. And then I think you look back on that point in your life and you realize the stakes maybe weren't quite as high as what you realized at the time. Um, but at that kind of phase in my life, I remember having a spiritual director, and I was offered this job that I thought was the job that I was meant to do, or um, pursue this relationship with my eventual wife, Brooklyn. And it felt to me like an either or question. I couldn't do both. And what my spiritual director said to me at that time is he said, think about the flow of your life. You could say the trajectory of your life up to this point. What makes sense within the context of that flow, of that trajectory? And I really like the question. I come back to it even now when I'm thinking about decisions I'm making and that kind of stuff. And the ways in which I've seen God move in my life are primarily through times that I didn't expect things that come up. They felt like gift. They felt like a surprise. They felt like something that I couldn't have anticipated if I were just looking backwards. And so I'm constantly kind of holding both those things in my hands. What does it look like to both discern the ways in which I've lived my life, that God's walked with me, and what are the things that God has for me in this moment that maybe I'm not expecting? And I don't know. Both those things are really live for me when I'm trying to make a decision. A
That
push
hits really
pause.
hard. No,
Yeah,
that
thanks.
really hit hard. What's an example of a gift when you said that
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the most obvious example is the job that I'm working right now. So I work at a nonprofit that's a storytelling nonprofit. If you would have told me when I was 18, coming out of high school, going into college, 22, going out of undergrad, going to grad school, coming out of grad school, that I was going to run a storytelling nonprofit when I was 38 years old, I wouldn't have even known what you meant. I don't even like there would be no frame of reference for what the heck you were talking about. Um, but it emerged so organically and kind of it felt like outside of the context of my own grasping. It felt like gift to me. That something that was given to me. I think another thing that I would say is one of the most formative experiences that I had as a young person was at 19, after kind of waking up to some of the stuff that was happening in Palestine. I was given the opportunity to spend the summer in Bethlehem, Beit Sahor, and if you'd have told me that 6 months before, I wouldn't have even had a frame of reference. I would have no context for what you were talking about. But that shaped and altered the path of my trajectory so significantly. Um, so those are two immediate things that come to mind. Um, and also, I've been the same person, growing and evolving and whatever throughout that whole process. But I'm just like endlessly fascinated, comforted, inspired by the surprising movement of God in my life. The movement of God that doesn't require me to conjure it or force it, but that it's a gift.
that's beautiful.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks.
I I don't even know where to start with that. There's so many places to start. You should just ask me a question because otherwise I'm gonna end up staring into space for a few hours trying to process everything you said. It and I'm saying that in part because I feel like the last few days have been really heavy
Yeah,
and really
sure.
meaningful in a lot of ways. And one of them is this is the first Ramadan in decades where I'm trying to fast. And it was for medical reasons I wasn't able to fast. And I've gotten some of that, alhamdulillah, thank God, under control, and talked to a few doctors. They said, hey, try it out, how, like, to see
Hmm.
how it goes. Don't make it
Hmm.
necessarily every day. Don't beat yourself up about it. And yesterday I managed about 10 hours, no food, no drink. That was a big thing, right? And again, it formally doesn't count religiously, like it's not a fast, right? But
Sure.
it's indicating that I might be able to do it. And so that's a lot to process as well. But it's also a moment where I'm asking some really hard questions about where do I want to go next? What does this moment mean? How
Yeah.
do I want to live out being a Muslim right now? And I think I'm also, thanks to the Jesuits and some prompts and even your questions right here, I'm very much trying to make sense of what is there, that there is a big difference between being seen as Muslim and being in Muslim spaces and pursuing a relationship with the faith that is organic and sincere and doesn't get tethered to other people's expectations. Not in the sense that
Sure.
other people's expectations don't matter, but that you can't put the cart before the horse, if that makes sense.
Would you like to be able to live your faith independent of those expectations?
So I'll give you a little bit of an example. I was actually thinking one of the questions I got yesterday at the session at Xavier really helped me see something that I hadn't seen before. So when I went to New York University when I was in college, I found myself really good at building community and building institutions and
Yeah.
thinking outside of the box. So I helped to found the Islamic Center at New York University. I founded an organization called Shuruk, which actually still exists. And the idea was there used to be this thing called Islam Awareness Week. Even at the age of 19, I recognized that was perhaps not the best way to advertise religion because it sounds like you're raising consciousness about something people should be worried about, right?
Yeah,
Awareness Week
like
sounds a little,
cancer. Yeah,
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 it is
exactly. Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
the
yeah,
resonance that comes up. And
yeah.
but also NYU didn't allow you to do a theme week unless you had sponsoring organizations. And who's going to sponsor an Islam Awareness Week other than the Islamic Center? And so
Sure.
I realized this was not actually a challenge, but an opportunity. So we created an event. It started as a week, it then became a month. Muslim cultures, and so we partnered with the Black Student Association, Pakistani Students Association. Actually, we created the Pakistani Students Association, and we did all these different kind of events, from walking tours of Harlem to Kurdish music, and it was really fun. And then there was a newsletter that turned into a magazine, and all this stuff. And I was really good at it, and I really enjoyed it. And we started attracting funding and all that stuff. And the reason I'm saying that is 9/11 forced all of us into a different space, because instead of building a local, organic, dynamic community in, frankly, one of the coolest cities in the world that could be and would be a beacon for all kinds of people and a space for all kinds of people where you could come to the space as a Muslim, whatever that meant for you, and take that seriously. Suddenly we were the subject of international conversations. And I found for many,
Totally.
many years, I got pulled into, and it's exactly, and this is why what you said really hit, the stakes felt apocalyptic.
Hmm.
And I've noticed that, and maybe this is just a human tendency, maybe it's the last 20, 30 years, everything is apocalyptic.
Yeah.
We were sure after 9/11 that we would start World War III, and now there's AI and there's climate change. And I'm not discounting the seriousness of those things. But sometimes when you frame something as all or nothing, you prevent yourself, you allow perfect to become the enemy of the good, right?
Absolutely.
And if I can be even a little bit provocative, we allow wicked to prevent us from acknowledging that sometimes there's no way but to deal with bad in the world, right? There is no perfect world in any way,
Hmm.
shape, or form. And
Hmm.
and sometimes there are less bad and more bad options. And when you try to fight the less bad, you end up with more bad, right? And those are
Yeah.
all the kinds of things you have to learn by trial and error. But when I came to Cincinnati 5 years ago, I think what I enjoyed most and what I enjoy the most is building locally. I'm not saying that national and international conversations don't matter. Of course they do. Like everyone else in the world with a conscience, I've watched Gaza and been horrified, right? There's a genocide. We're funding the genocide. It's awful. We see it on our phones. We wonder why we can't cultivate the power to put an end to it and create a better outcome. I got that. But
Hmm.
maybe one of the reasons we can't is because we find it harder and harder to build locally in such a way that endures, right? And
Hmm.
so what I keep coming back to is I had a really tough spell of poor health, as I sort of alluded to, and I left an amazing, promising job in DC, and I went to Dubai for a year. And Dubai is not ordinarily the kind of place where people have spiritual epiphanies. Well, maybe they do actually, because they're like, whatever this is way over the top. And Dubai was the first place where I could go to a mosque and I could go in and pray and sit there, and nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared who I was. And frankly, I didn't have to care about anything outside of the act of worship because the mosque is paid for. Ain't nobody have to do fundraising. Even if they do, they're certainly not going to ask me. I'm on a tourist visa. I have nothing to do with this place. And I'm not saying that because we shouldn't be invested in important conversations, but I feel like something we often don't get, we don't give to young people, and we don't cherish nearly enough is the fact of and the value of and the beauty of and the necessity of being alone with God
Hmm.
and having that relationship in at least some part of our lives independent of anything else. And that is the foundation and the aspiration of every life of faith, right? And so I obviously God places us where he wills and chooses us to live the lives we live. So I can't say that I wish I didn't have what I had because we are born into the realities we were born into, right? We inherit these. No one chooses their race or ethnicity or what have you. But I wish I had taken more time for faith, and I want to do that now. And so it's not a
Hmm.
question of saying I don't want to be a part of a faith community. That's not what I mean. It's that I want to take Ramadan, for example, to just have more time with what is actually at the heart of faith as I understand it, which is the divine. And less time on conversations that, as important as they are, end up taking more from us and giving less to us.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think that one of the gifts of the tradition I grew up in was this emphasis on, I don't know, the meme is like a personal relationship with God, right? And that's a gift that I'm still grateful for. It's a thing that still really resonates with me. Um, and some of the transition as I mature and evolve is what does that look like in the collective? Um, what does it actually mean in the collective? And I think for you, it's maybe it's like like opposite. It's backwards maybe. I mean, respond to me if you disagree with this, but it feels like the context is so decisive in terms of how you have viewed yourself and looked at yourself that the thing you're trying to give to these high schoolers is the space for them to kind of sort out individually what is their faith identity look like for them as individuals. Does that resonate or is that not quite it?
Yeah, no, that's entirely it. I when I had my crash and I went to Dubai and I came back and tried to piece together who I want to be, I I really I became attached to a Sufi order, and I had for the first time in my life a spiritual mentor. And that was an incredible experience for me because suddenly there was someone who was invested in my life of faith, right? That it
Yeah.
that it
Yep.
it went from being about checklist and ritual observance, all of which ritual observance is very important. I'm not in the least denying that, but it never went beyond that. And so I
Mhm.
often struggled with ritual because as much as I knew, and I knew this intellectually, I could explain this to people that the point of prayer is not merely to go through the motions, that it is to cultivate an inner state
Of course.
without ever letting go of the external practice, right? That those
Mhm.
those move in tandem, right? Just as for example, if your goal in working out is to look a certain way, that's all you'll get out of it. But if your goal in working out is, as our Abdullah Rothman episode pointed out, to connect to God, then you will find a way to connect through that. And eventually, I left that Sufi order, but I took a lot from that experience, including the beauty and richness of the tradition. And actually, one thing we did last week in the class I teach high schoolers, which is 12 students, freshmen to seniors here in the Cincinnati area, young men, young women, is I made them memorize a dua, a prayer attributed to King David, peace be upon him, via the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about asking for God's love. So it's,
Mhm.
Our Lord, I ask you for your love and the love of those who love you, and the works or the deeds or the commitments that earn your love, and make your love more beloved to me than my own self and my own family, and even a drink of cold water, right?
Mhm.
Which was especially ironic because I think the day we first learned it, it was like -15 outside, so it was kind of funny. But and and then I made them memorize it and recite it individually to me, and it was really hard for them because they're embarrassed. Obviously, they're next to the other gender, and they're it's not an easy position to be in, and they're very self-conscious, especially at age. But I said to them that you should never be self-conscious about approaching God, and I wanted to take some of that away so that they can see this journey into faith as something they have a right to. Now, yeah, I
Yeah.
did I did walk away from that order, and that's a longer conversation, but I've tried to keep that in mind because I think it's something that we don't get enough of, and I think it's nourishing and healing, and it's also balancing, right? Because then we don't go too far in our commitments, our activism, our engagements, and forget why we're really in this at all.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
actually, and I would love to hear from you, having a spiritual director, how you found that person, how that relationship unfolded, and now where do you go for that direction? Because I mean, at least for my part, I would say it's still nice to have someone check in and push you and keep tabs on you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 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 it does make sense. I think, I went to seminary, and so one of my professors I really connected with, and one of the things about me is I've never really been embarrassed to try to form relationships.
Mhm.
So like,
That is a
um,
great thing to have.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm always like the guy who, actually, you and I are much more mutual, but typically I'm the guy who's making the calls, sending the texts, that kind of stuff, and I'm totally fine with that. I think that's great. But anyways, I had a professor. His name was Jay. I really liked this dude, and um, a lot of the ways that he lived his life were the ways that I wanted to live my life. Whether it was how he was a dad, how he was a husband, his vocation, all this kind of stuff. And so I think I just asked him, like, "Hey, would you be willing to start meeting?" And that's a hard thing to say no to, you know? It's like, no, like, so anyway, so he said yes. And then that kind of like carved out a space in my life for, this was a thing that I found valuable. And
Mhm.
so when I left seminary, I started looking for another person to kind of fill in that role. And so there was a person that filled that role for a while. And then when I moved to Cincinnati, I also had some significant health stuff. And in that context, I wanted somebody who had language to help me navigate that moment of my life where I was sort of facing my own mortality. And so at that point, I just like cold called Xavier. And I'm like, do you have any priests who are doing spiritual direction? I have zero income at this point, but I would love to start meeting with somebody. And a local priest, Father Richard Bowman, started meeting with me, and we met for, I don't know, 8 years probably, once a
Wow.
month. Yeah. And since he's kind of, he's got older, he went to an assisted living place, and he sort of like left that part of his vocation. Um, there's been a bit of a void. And I think there's somebody who is emerging right now as kind of the next iteration of this spiritual director, mentor kind of role. But the other weird thing about this, Haroon, I'm sure you can relate to this, is the older you get, the harder it is to find somebody who is an advisor or a mentor to you, because the invitation shifts to you becoming the mentor or advisor to other people just as a function of age. And yeah, so I think so that's changing a bit for me. Yeah, period. That's what I have to say. You
So
say something to that. Yeah.
yeah, I got lots of things to say.
Yeah.
You are not Catholic,
No, 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 no.
so you reached out to Xavier all the same. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always appreciated many aspects of the Catholic tradition, specifically the Jesuit tradition, around decision making, around spiritual practices, around a bunch of stuff. And there's kind of like through my own spiritual journey, this is pretty common in the evangelical world. As you sort of deconstruct and reconstruct your own faith identity, often there's a growing kind of appreciation for the more traditional forms of the faith. And so I had been exposed to a bunch of different kind of aspects of the spirituality and some of the different practices. And I've never, it's been a long, long time since I've seen the relationship to the Catholic Church as an adversarial one. I think it's a beautiful part of, I would say, the body of Christ. So that was never uncomfortable for me. I think it was sometimes a little weird for Father Bowman, from when, like, the words I use, the phrases I use, he didn't quite, like, there wasn't always a one-to-one kind of understanding. But that translation work is the work that I've been doing across faith traditions or in different cultural settings, like, for most of my life. So that's a good thing, not a negative thing.
So
Yeah.
what do you think, what do you feel you need now, spiritually, religiously, right? Because we're talking a lot about younger people, but for men
Yeah, yeah.
around about our age, or just people around about our age,
Yeah.
is there anything that surprises you even?
That I need,
Yeah,
or
religiously, spiritually, even just generally, I think it's like as a person in your formation, getting through this stage of life and maybe trying to get to where you want to be. It's a very poorly formed question, but maybe that gives you opportunities to take it in whatever. I'm trying to find the upside here to my incoherence.
yeah, no, so I think, like, what I'm looking for in my spiritual life are pretty practical applications. Things like, how do I stay present um to my own desires and fears and sadness? How do I continue to cultivate kindness and presence and gentleness with my kids? Um, and I think, I mean, what I'm looking for, and I get this. I mean, I think I get this from you. I get this from other friends that I have. So it's not exclusively. I don't exclusively have to find this in a mentor or advisor kind of role, but I want people around me who care about my spiritual well-being and who are going to say, "Hey, you're down or off center, or you've forgotten about your values here, but what about the," I mean, I want people around me to say that kind of stuff, who care. I was gonna
You
curse.
can you can
Yeah,
say it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
Who
not
give a
gonna.
shit about me and my spiritual life, you know? So,
I mean, yeah.
yeah,
I got you
exactly.
there. I got you there.
Yeah.
No, I get that entirely. I think, like I said, I really want to use this Ramadan to create more space for, there's certain Muslim spiritual practices that I have practiced, and yet there's a quote by Rumi that one of my colleagues at Xavier shared after Friday prayers. And by the way, I got to tell you about the hardest Friday prayer I've ever led in my life, but that's another question or another comment. And he shared this quote. I'm gonna muck it up, but it was something to the effect of, "You think you're in prison, but the door is wide open."
Yeah.
That the thing, and he said it far more profoundly and eloquently than I could. But effectively, you think you're trapped, but you also know the way out. And what is it that's holding you back? And there are some Muslim practices that I have not availed myself of enough and built them with discipline. So my hope this Ramadan, for example, is there's one practice called muraqabah, which is it comes from a verse in the Quran, "Inna Allah kana alaykum raqiba," like God is watching over you, but almost as if God is standing over you. And there's a sense of, I think the way I read it, there's a sense both of warning and of consolation, that whatever it is you're doing, remember he's right there effectively. He's with you. And if you're doing something good or you're facing hard times, that's a good thing. But if you're doing something you shouldn't be, or maybe you're facing really good times and you're not showing the requisite gratitude for it, you get what I mean. And muraqabah is a kind of, Abdullah Rothman, who I mentioned earlier. I don't remember what episode that was, but he separately has done a series on YouTube called Midnight Moments, which he did this in Ramadan, I think during COVID, where he taught people how to do muraqabah, which is a kind of Muslim meditation. I know there's analogs in Christian traditions and obviously Buddhism and things like that, but it's this way of centering yourself in the presence of the divine. And kind of, I mean, one is just the nourishment of being with God for those 5-10 minutes in a very intense, specific, singular way, but then the way it radiates out into your life, right? That you can come back to that in harder moments. This idea that that the God is actually always with you, but we forget that he's present with us, right?
Sure.
So that's something I think Ramadan always has the ability to point out that I can be very impatient. I think sometimes I am ambitious in an unhealthy way, right? But I think another thing that's really come up to me in the last year is this sense that if I have only a certain amount of time left, then I feel like I should spend more of that time doing the things that give me personal uh, grounding and feel meaningful. So I'm actually this Ramadan, other than for work, I'm fasting from Instagram, for example. I don't want to be on social media, except so I deleted it off my phone, for example.
It's gonna be hard it's gonna be hard to promote this episode, Haroon. I'm just joking.
It is, but I said other than for work, right? Because I do acknowledge that technology can have uses, right?
Yeah.
But it takes us away. I started this in December, and after like a few days of a lot of empty time and boredom, I went back to a novel I'd been working on, and I found myself within a week I was writing again. And I said to myself, I think a lot of times we trap ourselves, or actually I wouldn't even say that. I think we are trapped by things around us that don't have our best interests at heart. Like you said, you want people around you who say they give you know what about you, right?
No, you're not going to curse. You say,
I'm fasting. I'm fasting. I can't. I promise I will curse at you if you would like me to, in a spirit of interfaith solidarity after Ramadan. I don't know if I should say inshallah to that, so I will not. But it's like we also need to have people around us who help us pull away from the things that are pulling us away from who we really are, who we're meant to be.
Yeah.
And I do think that I lose a lot of time to things that are stupid, right?
Sure.
Right? As opposed to things that I actually care about. And that's another space where I feel like it's that clarity from stepping away. And when you get caught in a cycle of things, I don't know if that makes sense. So basically this podcast is, and a conversation with you is my spiritual directorship. So take that with a grain of salt,
All right. Amazing. No, I really love, I mean, I talked about for me for Lent this year, my centering prayer refrain is I am returning, right? I'm returning. And I love the idea of the spiritual path is a path of remembering, of return to who we really are. Sometimes I get caught in this, I don't know if this is too like provocative of a statement, but in the idolatry of self-improvement. Like, what can I do to become better, to become more holy, to become whatever? And it feels like a much more whole life-giving invitation is, what can I do to remember who I actually am at my core? I love that. Um, I also have noticed as you're talking throughout this episode that you've mentioned death like 3 or 4 times. And I wonder, like, what does death have to do with how you're deciding your Ramadan practice and making decisions? Like, how is that alive for you right now?
How is death alive for me?
Yeah, yeah. And I say that very specifically because I mean this is a theme that we talked about in the Peter Block episode, right?
Mm.
How the invitation of death is to live a more, what's the word? Alive life.
Alive life.
Yeah.
This part is a little wild. You said idolatry of self at the same time I was thinking about idolatry of self, which is a little strange, but
Hmm.
maybe it's not that strange. So my approach to this will be contradictory, but that's okay. I can live with the complexity. I'm an adult. Do you know there's this great line in The Wire where I forgot McNulty's partner's name, but he's like a kind of a well-dressed guy,
uh,
and he references the brand of tie he's wearing. And McNulty says, "Do you know what they call guys who know the brands of ties they wear?" McNulty thinking he's got, quite the jab, and he turns to him and says, "Yeah, adults." And I thought that was a great line. But when it comes to complexity, and as an aside, I have noted that one of the things my students appreciate and are really excited by is the ability to admit to complexity in their own lives and
sure.
how to navigate that. And we sometimes don't empower them to do that, but that's just an aside that I have to put in there in case there's parents listening, because they should know that.
Yeah.
The contradiction I'm pointing to is, on the one hand, yes, I actually thought this. My wife, who is brilliant and beautiful and always pushes me in the right direction, even if I don't want to admit it. Also, she's Punjabi, so everything's perfect. But she, she said to me, because I was juggling a lot these last few months. I had the Xavier thing, I have
Yeah.
travel company leadership retreat. There's the Substack for the Halakha, there's the podcast, there's community programs Friday. There's a
Yeah.
lot, right? Not to mention husband, parent, all these things, right?
Yeah.
So she said, you're always going to be behind. No one will ever be on top of things. It's impossible. So tell yourself, unless there's a real emergency at 7 p.m., you're putting your phone down, you're putting your laptop away. That's it, you're done. And the first 2 days were really hard. And by the second week of this, 3 fascinating things happened. And the first I alluded to, which is I went back to the novel, which is incredible because it's something I haven't touched in 10 years and is deeply important to me. And
Mm.
once I got the noise out of my head, I said to myself, when I look back on my life, do I want to sit there and say, wow, I spent 485 hours over the years scrolling on Instagram, or do I want to say that I wrote a book?
Mhm. Mhm.
Do I want to, even if it doesn't get published, I wrote the damn thing. Right.
Mm.
I made something that is important to me. Then, because I had free time, Reza and I, our youngest, we started watching movies together. And that was fun. And he's really ecumenical in his interests, shall we say. He's very open to different types of films and things like that. So we watched the autobiography of Malcolm X, and we let him stay up to watch it. And maybe that wasn't the best decision from one perspective, but it was a brilliant decision from another. He should know this man's life, right?
Mhm.
And the third is, and this was actually the most fascinating of all, I found I organically and unintentionally memorized a dua, a supplication, without even trying. Once
Mm.
my mind was liberated from the kind of shattering effects of algorithms, my ability to form memories returned.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this is because I've seen a lot of older people in our community who spend a lot of time on their phones.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'm thinking to myself, these are supposed to be the years where you get to be with family, you get to go to the mosque, and you, like, no one can stop you at this point, right? You're retired, right? Like, we
Uh-huh.
live in what might be the last generation of Americans who get to enjoy retirement, or at least some of them do, right? And hopefully we can fix our country so that people get to live that kind of life. But do like, if the habits I have now are training for who I will become, sort of like what you said about your spiritual director, that you want to be a certain type of person. I also took this as a warning
Yeah.
that actually, you see, like the books behind you or the books behind me, I would love, God willing, if we live in a world where I can retire. I would love to, if it's meant for me, to have grandkids around and books to read and finally do the things I don't get to do. And so it was this consciousness of death, but not in the sense of death as a morbid closure, but as an aspiration that when I leave this world, who do I want to be? And who I am now is probably pointing in the direction of who I will become, right? That if I can't do it now, I'm less likely to do it in 20 years. But then here's the contradiction, and all of my comments are way too long, so please forgive me.
I'm riding with you. Yeah, keep going.
But
Yep.
you said idolatry of self, and that really hit me while you were talking, because I said maybe all these aspirations and ambitions are just idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just, this is so hard to say because I am type A, and I come from a culture of overachievers, and there's a lot of internal inconsistencies in South Asian American Islam and a lot of American Islam. And I'm not exempting myself from that. I'm an embodiment of that. I'm on the one hand saying we need to uh, put ourselves into a divine plan. We need to be engaged with what God wants from us. We need to put God first and ourselves second. All of that is right and true. And then here I am sitting thinking, have I done enough with my life?
Yeah.
Have I accomplished enough? Am I doing this for the right reasons? As opposed to the very scary act of saying, I'm going to try to do what is right and good and leave
Yeah.
the results to the divine, which is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I do not think I have the kind of faith to do that. I'm just being honest. But I would like to, even if that scares me. So I'll just pray for it, even as it scares the crap out of me. And
Yeah.
then we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
hear
know.
you. Yeah, I hear you. I think a couple of things are coming up for me. The first one is it's interesting to me that the way, at least the first part of the comment, the way you're assessing value and meaning is as kind of like a retrospective from the place of your death. What was meaningful, valuable? What did I wish I had spent time on? How do I wish I would have lived? That it seems implied within that value and meaning for you have to do with that durability that you're looking for in the community part that you were talking about earlier. I also think like the obsession to kind of circle back around of how to make decisions or to live in the context of God's will or that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the things my spiritual director said to me, my first spiritual director, Jay, is, and I think he maybe said this like intentionally kind of provocatively. He said, I'm not sure God cares so much about whether you take this job or not. I think what God cares about is if you're living in a way that loves your neighbor and is forgiving and is compassionate. And what he said was, if you are in line with the way what God's will for you is in terms of how you're living your life, then I think you kind of have freedom to do what you want beyond that. And I like that. I like that a lot. I think that we were joking the other day about how all 18-year-old boys are obsessed with the idea of free will or predestination. But I love the idea that God does place us in certain places, and God does have gift for us in terms of different offerings that we're experiencing throughout our life, and also that we have agency in following the interests that maybe were God given, but that we still do have decisions to make, and that actually there are live places of agency that we can exercise. So
I like that. I was gonna say let's just do lightning round, because I was gonna be like, okay, Joey, free will or predestination, but I'm not gonna do that. But I have good news on that front, but I will share that separately. But I wanted to.
What's the good news? The good news is
So
you have choice. Congratulations.
we have choice, I think. I don't know who said it. It was they took Descartes' cogito ergo sum and they turned it into I think, therefore I think I am, which I always appreciated. But actually, so I do this thing in the high school class I teach where at the beginning of every semester I ask them to write down something they're wrestling with and struggling with, and we leave it
Uh-huh.
anonymous. This time what I did is I asked them to do that, leave it anonymous, and then I sorted them into groups. Um I pre-sorted them into groups. I asked them, they were co-ed groups. I asked them to write down these things they're struggling with. And I said, just you can be honest, but be respectful and thoughtful about it because we are going to share them, but share them without attribution. And then I shared them across the groups. And so group one got group two's doubts, and group two got group one's doubts.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then I sat them across from each other and I gave them 10 or 15 minutes to prep. And then they had to basically defend each other's doubts and make a best case argument against the thing that ostensibly they should be for. Does that make sense? So here's something about religion I'm struggling with. This is why this is actually something people should struggle with. And it was very,
Oh,
it
I
was,
like that.
and then
Yeah.
the other side had to come up with a counter argument, and then they had to come up with a counter argument. And they went crazy. There was a lot of yelling and screaming. It was a lot of fun. It went way over time, which is unheard of. No phones. They were, again, they were articulating faith commitments and criticisms of faith in a really robust way. Because I said, they do an application before they start the course, and I give them a list of 15 things. Pick 3 of these. Most of them can count to 3, not all of them. Pick 3 of these that you want to focus on in the class. And number 1 was advocating for Islam and Muslims. And I said, okay, if you want to be able to advocate for a faith tradition, you should be able to hear out and give full weight to a robust criticism.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
you should be able to respect the person who's giving it to you, and you should be able to hear it and respond to it thoughtfully and not in a reflexive gotcha kind of way. And so and the interesting thing, and this is totally unintentional, group 1 and group 2 both selected the same doubt that they had inadvertently written. There were, again, 12 doubts, but a few of them overlapped, and they were free will versus predestination. So much to their surprise, dismay, horror, and grief, they were forced to defend and oppose the same argument in alternating turns, which blew their minds. And I like to do things like that, right? I like to challenge them. And then afterwards, we had a 45-minute conversation. Class ends at 3. We didn't end until 3:45. They were with me for basically 3 hours. A lot of nachos were consumed in this time. But they just wanted to talk about free will and predestination. So then a few days afterwards, my copy of Christopher Beha's Why I Am Not an Atheist came, and I started reading it, and immediately I'm hooked. And I've read through about 25% of it. And in passing, I mentioned to one of them, we have a text group, and I said, if you're really interested in this question, and you seemed really interested, you might want to take a look at this book. It comes from the perspective of a lapsed Catholic who's returning to his faith. And he said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, how long is it? And then I shared the Yoda meme, do or do not, there is no try. And he said, okay, I'll read it. And then lo and behold, 7 of them said they want to read it. And they will meet with me separately at one of our Yemeni coffee shops. We'll set up a schedule after Ramadan, like once a month, to discuss the book. And to me, as an educator, that is like unprecedented, that they are volunteering to read a really dense book, a really heavy book from a different perspective because they want to dig into this question. And that was probably a huge win for the week, because it's a hard week, a lot going on. It's tough. I'm tired. We're all tired. And it was like you said, this moment of, I don't know what it was, but it was beautiful. It was totally unexpected. I just said in not in jest, I was like, you should read it, but I didn't actually think he would want to. They've got a lot going on. They've so many classes and commitments and things like that.
Yeah.
And they wanted to, and it was men and women of these young men and women who wanted to read it, from freshmen to seniors. And to me, that's a sign of how much desire there is to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And that when you push people, they often want to be pushed, which is my way of transitioning to asking you, because I did want to ask you this.
Wait a minute. Before you ask me.
Okay,
I just want to say one thing. What really resonated with me there was the idea that the doubts or questions that we have are things that we should struggle with. I think I love so much the idea that maybe the root of some of the unnecessary suffering that we're experiencing is that we're going to have clear answers or fulfillment. And maybe the actual spiritual path is the understanding that continuing to ask the question, continuing to struggle is like the whole point. So anyways, I just want to say that. What question do you want to ask me? Go ahead. Yeah.
So actually now you've taken me in a different direction, but I think that's so true, because I'll say that I've done this across multiple classes, high school and college students, and some of the most common questions that come up are, for example, and it's interesting because they can ask anything, are how come I don't feel anything in prayer every time I pray?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually just saw this book by Zaid Adhami, who's a professor at Williams College. I don't know him. I just saw the book. It's about how it might be a more I'm paraphrasing, condensing a lot. Also, I got the book, but I haven't read it yet. About how when we study American Muslims, we often apply paradigms from the Muslim majority world, but actually he thinks that one of the most salient paradigms is this question of authenticity, that many people struggle with their faith because they think that it is supposed to be equally intensely meaningful at all times.
Yeah.
As opposed to what you're saying, which is sometimes it sucks. Like I went to the first night of Tarawih prayers, the special Ramadan prayers at night at our local mosque right here in Mason, and I'm all excited. I'm psyched to be there, but you have to get really early. You have to get in really early because parking. And after 25 minutes of sitting on my butt on the floor, I got a bad back. I'm really tired. We haven't even started yet. I don't know how I'm going to do this. What time am I getting? Like, all these thoughts are raging through your head. And, like it sounds trivial and silly, but like that's never going to go away, really.
It's never going to go away.
And then it's just going to suck in different ways. And then I'm thinking, like, hey, if it's this painful now, what am I going to do in a few years when Ramadan is in January? I'm even older. I'll have like arthritic pain because I have a lot of back injuries, back surgeries. When it's cold, it's worse, right? And so it's like I can pretend it'll never matter, but I guess to what you're saying is but the thing is, maybe when you're younger, it's harder to internalize that because you don't have enough life experience to realize that, yeah, you will actually always struggle. But maybe if there's someone there who cares about you, who's invested in you, who says, like, guess what? Sometimes it will suck. And that goes a long way.
Totally. But, and I would say even more, like, could we say in a similar way that what you're praying for is to trust God with the outcomes, to say that actually the meaning here is the intention to show up at the mosque, at the masjid, and even it's not actually about how you're going to feel in the prayer or the outcome, but it's about showing up. It's about embracing the struggle. I feel like I'm like turning into a Marcus Aurelius poster or something, but like, I mean, like that's what I'm trying to say.
No, that's fine. Yeah. I think I liked Marcus Aurelius when I read him many years ago. But
yeah.
Okay, no. So I actually have like short burst questions for you because I think that's a good way to
conclude. Cool.
To close this out. So, first question: what are 3 things people should look for in mentors or in people they turn to for guidance, advice, what have you? Whether let's keep it a little bit narrower: religion, spirituality, faith, what have you.
I mean, I would keep it super practical. I think you want to find somebody who lives a life of faith that you want to emulate, that has relationships that you respect and want to emulate. And the third thing is, I don't know. It's like, it's really great to connect with somebody intellectually and spiritually and stuff, but it would also be really nice in the context of that relationship to be able to be your full self. So maybe someone who doesn't take themselves so seriously. Like sometimes you can break the super earnest kind of veneer and say something a little off the wall. Those are the 3 things. What about you? What would you add or subtract?
Ask me a different question, Joe.
Oh, I have to ask you the same. Are you like preloaded with more questions here?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll pretend like I prepared them in advance, but they've just been occurring to me organically in the course of our conversation. So I have more, and I will fire away. But now's your chance to fire away if you like. I
It's
can
it's
also ask the question. I can answer what you want me to, but this is your chance to get in a word edgewise. Like, you can try to convert me, whatever feels like you've got a shot. So
how about in one breath, you talked about almost converting to Catholicism back in when you were in high school. In one breath, why are you still a Muslim?
as a writer, I can write long sentences, semicolon. Therefore, this one breath will, M dash, be very long, M dash, and you have to put up with it. I never had a problem with the concept of God. I've never been able to conceive of existence absent the divine. The thing that kept me Muslim was ultimately the person of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So if I were to have become a Catholic, I would have had to conclude that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was either intentionally or
Mm,
unintentionally misleading people by making claims that either he didn't know were true or he did know were not true, didn't know weren't true. Do you know what you know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah,
Effectively, he would be misleading people. And given what I knew, there's an emotional attachment when you're raised in a tradition. So this is a person that I love and feel a deep affection for. That's hard to convey in words. But even from a kind of blank canvas perspective, zoom out a little bit, what I knew of him and the impact he had on people and the kinds of people he impacted, right? So actually, to answer your question on signs of a mentor, one way to determine if a mentor is a good mentor is to look to the quality of their mentees, right?
oh
If the
yeah, that's
people
great.
around
Yeah,
them are sycophants or insecure
yeah,
or
yeah,
weak-willed, and when I looked at the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when I looked at the people around him, and Muslims will know, these names, they'll resonate with them, but like Omar, Aisha, Abu Bakr, Khadija, may God be pleased with them, these are people who are remarkable individuals. They would not easily yield themselves to someone except that someone had a certain caliber of character and personality, right? So I
yeah.
couldn't do that. Basically, that's the very long one breath answer. And then by being Muslim, I could still have, because I've always found the figure of Jesus, peace be upon him, and his teachings to be deeply moving. And if I remain Muslim, I could have both. And
Yeah.
so that was a little bit of a, you can't have your cake and eat it too, but
You're like,
yes, in
watch
fact
me,
you can, except in
watch me,
Ramadan. Except in
right?
Ramadan, then you have to look at the cake until sundown. But
Until sundown.
until
Yeah.
sundown. Also, it's my wife's birthday today,
Happy
so
birthday,
she
son.
will have
Okay.
cake.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
That that
ask me
answers.
one more, and I have one more for you, and then let's get the heck out of here.
Okay.
Okay.
What are 3 books Ezra Klein needs to read?
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I'm just kidding. That's not my real question. So my question is, what are your hopes for this Lent? And I guess
That's
let's make it
exactly where
3.
I was going. That's so crazy. Okay.
I'm not observing Lent though, so just so
Yeah, I
you
know,
know,
but
I
I
probably
have a
made
little
that clear.
different shape, a little different
Sure, sure,
perspective on it.
sure.
My hopes for this Lent are that I break my expectation that the only thing that is valuable is a thing that is durable. Um and by that I mean, like,
Say more.
I have like this there's this little that is called a brick, and it's this little item that you tap your phone to, and it locks you out of your whatever social media and internet and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um
I use Opal. I get what you mean.
yeah,
Similar kind of, yeah.
yeah. And it keeps track of your how many days you've gone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I really, if I'm being totally honest, I really wanted to say like 40 days, never unbricked my phone, right? But practically, I don't know if that's really going to happen. And so, what I want to break myself of is the expectation that the only way this Lent will have been valuable is if the things that I've committed to this Lent have been observed like perfectly, without misstep. So I want to break myself of that expectation. And here's my question for you. I was really, I was, it kind of hit me that you were able to be to fast during Ramadan. I remember you when you first told me that this wasn't something that was possible for you, and it felt like there was a grief coming off of you because of that. And so, and I just thought it was so cool that you're like, I was able to do 10 hours yesterday. So there is this really intentional kind of entering into the practice of what is the point of it. And my question for you is, if you were to look at the end of Ramadan, you're celebrating Eid and Ramadan is over, what will have happened for this Ramadan to be meaningful for you?
I think I'm searching for these moments that come every once in a while in prayer where you feel the presence of God.
Mhm.
And for me, and I suppose as a Muslim, Ramadan is a time when we are closer to the divine than at
Yeah.
any other time, really, of the year. And so there are these intense moments of intimacy and proximity. And I've had those in prayer, collective prayer, when we pray at the mosque. And it's not always because it's loud and you're tired and dehydrated and
Sure.
it's just a lot happening. I think there's about 2,000 people who attend the prayers every night. So it's, you can imagine, overwhelming. But I've struggled to find that kind of intensity and proximity by myself.
Yeah.
And I would like to search out in Ramadan, it's nighttime, especially the late night hours, the last third of the night, that have a special valence. But there's no one at the mosque then in comparable numbers. It's not the same kind of energy. Everyone would be really tired. It's really hard to get there. It's really hard to even wake up to sit by yourself at that time without keeling
Mm.
over asleep. I want to try to find that closeness on my own. Not because I see there's anything wrong with doing it collectively. I want to do that as well. But because I think what I yearn for is that kind of proximity that I know can come from wherever I might be, that it doesn't require all of that just for me to remember what I'm really doing here, which I
Mm.
suppose means breaking the idol of the self by yourself.